The teacup hit the floor before the laughter did, and somehow the laughter was worse. I watched it happen from 4 feet away, tray balanced on my hip, and I counted 3 things in the half-second it took the porcelain to shatter, the woman's hand trembling around nothing, the amber stains spreading across white linen, and the particular silence of a room deciding whether to help or watch. The room chose to watch. 12 women in silk and pearls at the long table by the window chose to watch, and one of them, the one in the plum coat with the too white smile, chose to laugh first so the rest would follow. "Oh, Odessa," the woman in plum said, and her voice was sugar poured over a blade. "You really can't be trusted with the good china anymore, can you?" The elderly woman at the center of the spilled tea sat very still. 70, maybe older, silver hair pinned with more care than her shaking hands should have allowed that morning. A coat that cost more than I made in 4 months, and hands that were now folded in her lap like she was trying to make herself smaller. Nobody at that table reached for a napkin. Nobody at that table reached for her. I did. I set the tray down on the service stand so hard the sugar bowl rattled, and I crossed the floor of the copper kettle with a rag in one hand and my whole chest gone hot and tight. Because I knew what this was. I had grown up watching rooms decide someone was worth humiliating, and I had promised myself, the day my own father called me a waste of a good mind because I'd presented Omega instead of Alpha, that I would never again be one of the people who just watched. "Ma'am, let me get that," I said, already kneeling, already blotting the tea from the tablecloth before it could reach her sleeve. Up close her eyes were wet and furious and ashamed all at once, and I hated the woman in plum with a sudden, total clarity I hadn't felt in years. That's the hook. That's the whole shape of what's coming. So before it runs any further, I want to ask you for one small thing, if a story like this one, about the people we overlook and the ones who finally see them, is the kind of thing you want more of. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next one. Now back to the copper kettle and the woman on the floor and the laughter that hadn't finished yet. "It's fine," the elderly woman said, though her voice wasn't. I'll pay for the cup." "The cup's not the issue, Odessa, darling," said the woman in plum, and she said it the way you'd correct a child in front of guests, loud enough to carry. "The issue is the bill. $62 for a luncheon you can't cover, on a card that declined twice. The issue is that the board has been far too kind about this for far too long." I felt the room's attention shift toward me like weather. I was 26 years old. I had exactly $11 in tips in my apron and a rent payment due in 6 days. And none of that stopped me from standing up between Odessa Ransome and the table of women who'd come here to watch her fail in public. "There's no decline," I said. "I ran this table myself. The account cleared at 11:40 this morning. I hadn't run the table. I hadn't seen the receipt, but I had watched the woman in plum hand the hostess a folded slip before lunch even started, and I had watched the hostess's face go carefully blank the way faces go when they've been told to lie, and 11 years of doing my aunt's books in my head before I could legally drive had left me with an instinct for arithmetic that didn't add up. If there's a decline on record, I'd like to see the receipt, because the numbers your friend just quoted don't match the ticket I printed. And who are you, exactly?" "Nobody you'd remember," I said, and I meant it as the truth, not as an insult, though I watched it land as both. But I can add. $62 for 4 courses across 12 guests comes to $5.18 a head before gratuity, and this table ordered the Wednesday tasting menu, which runs $71 per person. Somebody's bill got switched. I'd guess it was hers. I nodded at Odessa. "Since she's the one you decided to embarrass over it." Nobody said anything for 3 full seconds. I counted those too. Then Odessa Ransome laughed, A short, startled, real laugh, the first unguarded sound she'd made since I'd knelt at her feet, and pressed a napkin to her mouth like she could take it back, and it didn't matter. Because the damage to Plum's little performance was already done. The other women at the table were looking at each other now instead of at Odessa, and that, more than anything I'd said, was the thing that made the woman in Plum's face go tight and pale beneath her powder. "This is a private luncheon," she said. "Fetch your manager." I did not fetch my manager. I pulled the good cup. The one unchipped Robin's egg blue cup we kept in the back for nobody in particular, because I'd never once in 3 years found anyone I thought deserved it more than the person the room was busiest ignoring, and I poured Odessa Ransom a fresh cup of chamomile with my own shaking hands, and I set it in front of her like it was the only thing in the building that mattered. "There," I said. "On the house. I'm sorry about your cup." Odessa looked up at me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet. "What's your name?" "Wren," I said. "Wren Calloway." "Wren Calloway," she repeated, like she was filing it somewhere permanent. I won't forget that. She should have been the only one in that room I needed to worry about remembering me. She wasn't. My manager, Elias Ordway, found me 20 minutes later refilling water glasses with hands that hadn't stopped shaking, and he did not thank me for defending a guest from public humiliation. He told me I'd made a scene, that the woman in Plum was Priscilla Vane, a name in this town that opened doors and closed them, and that if the Vane account walked, so did my job. I told him the Vane account had tried to walk out on a rigged bill for an elderly woman who'd done nothing but sit there and be humiliated, and he told me to watch my tone, and I went home that night with $11 in my apron and no idea that I had just met, in the space of one shattered teacup, both the great obsession and the great danger of the rest of my life. I found out who Odessa Ransome was 3 days later, on a Tuesday, at 9:14 in the morning, when a black car the length of my studio apartment parked outside the Copper Kettle, and a woman got out of it, who made the entire street go quiet. I knew her the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes. Some old animal part of my brain stood up straight and paid attention before my conscious mind had even processed what I was looking at. She was tall in the way that made rooms rearrange themselves, dressed in charcoal wool that fit like it had been built onto her, rather than worn. And she moved like every step had already been planned 4 steps ahead. The tabloids called her the Alpha Queen of Ransom Holdings, and I had read that headline 100 times over the years, without once picturing an actual person behind it, a woman who'd taken her family's failing shipping company and turned it, at 29, into an empire that swallowed 3 of its competitors whole, and left the survivors grateful just to still exist. I had never once imagined that the Alpha Queen would have her mother's same stubborn chin, or that the scent rolling off her when she pushed through the Copper Kettle's door, black spruce and riverstone, cold and clean and dangerous, the kind of scent that made every Omega in the building lower their eyes without deciding to, would hit me like a hand flat against my sternum. "I'm looking for a waitress named Wren Calloway," she said to the hostess, in a voice pitched low and absolutely certain of being obeyed. Elias Ordway appeared from the back so fast I nearly laughed. "Ms. Ransome, is there a problem?" "Whatever it was, I assure you, there's no problem," she said without looking at him, because her eyes had already found me at the service station with a coffee pot frozen halfway to a cup. "I'm here to thank someone." She crossed the room the same way I had crossed it 3 days earlier, and she stopped close enough that I had to tip my head back to hold her gaze, and up close her eyes were a gray so pale they looked lit from behind, and I understood, with the particular clarity of someone about to lose their footing, that I was in serious trouble. "My mother told me what you did," she said. "The bill, the cup, the woman in Plum." She's talked about nothing else for 3 days. I didn't do anything anyone else shouldn't have, I said, because it was true, and because I needed something true to hold on to, while that scent kept unraveling something behind my ribs. No, she agreed. They shouldn't have. They didn't. You did. She studied me for a long moment, the kind of look that itemized rather than admired, and something in it made my whole body go warm despite myself. Priscilla Vane has been trying to discredit my mother's judgment for 6 months, and every time my mother has refused to tell me the details because she thinks I'll overreact. You did the arithmetic on a rigged bill in under 10 seconds in front of a hostile table. Where did you learn to do that? My aunt was a forensic accountant. She used to have me check her columns for fun when I was 9. I shrugged, because the next part still hurt to say plainly. I was supposed to follow her into it. Things didn't work out that way. They're going to now, Freya Ransom said. I need a private accountant who can walk into a room full of people determined to make a woman feel small and take the room apart with facts in under a minute. I have an opening. It pays 4 times whatever this place pays you, and it comes with an apartment in my building, so you're not doing this job on no sleep and a bus schedule. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered, right then, why a woman who ran an empire needed a 26-year-old ex-waitress with an unfinished accounting certification instead of any of the 100 qualified professionals she could hire with a phone call. I didn't ask, because Elias Ordway was already reaching for my arm to pull me back to my station, and because Freya Ransome looked at his hand on my elbow with an expression that made him let go so fast he nearly stumbled, and because some door I hadn't let myself imagine opening was standing wide open in front of me for the first time in my whole underestimated life. Okay, I said. Yes, okay, good, she said. And for just a second, under all that cold command, I saw something almost startled at how easily I'd said yes, like she'd expected to have to fight for it. Get your things, I'll wait. Elias didn't so much as ask me to finish my shift. I walked out of the copper kettle with my apron still on and $11 still folded in the pocket, and Freya Ransom held the car door for me herself. And that was the last ordinary morning of my life. The building she took me to had 60 floors of glass and steel, and a lobby so quiet I could hear my own pulse, and my reflection in the elevator mirror spent the entire climb trying to look like it belonged there. It didn't. Neither did I, not yet, not for a long time. But I didn't know that yet either. The apartment she gave me on the 31st floor was bigger than the house I'd grown up in, and it took me 4 days to stop apologizing to the housekeeping staff for existing in it. Freya's world ran on a scale I didn't have language for, my aunt's old ledgers, the ones I'd taught myself accounting from after she died, and left me nothing but a cardboard box of them, would have fit in a drawer of Freya's filing system and gotten lost. I ate lunch alone in a kitchen the size of my old apartment for the first week, until Odessa Ransom started showing up. She won't ask you to eat with her, Odessa told me, settling into the seat across from me at the kitchen island on my 5th day, uninvited and entirely welcome. She doesn't know how. Ask people, I mean. She knows how to command a boardroom, and she has no idea how to knock on a door. Why not? I asked, and then, because it felt too forward, you don't have to answer that. Odessa answered it anyway, turning her cup, a chipped one, I noticed, and made a mental note to fix that, slowly, on its saucer. Her father built this company on the idea that softness gets you killed. He was not a kind man, and he raised her to believe that love was a liability you couldn't afford in a boardroom. Then, he died, and the vultures came for the company within a week, and Freya learned, at 22, that he'd been right about the vultures, if nothing else. She spent 7 years making sure nobody could ever again mistake her for something soft. She looked at me over the rim of her cup, and there was nothing soft in that look either, just a shrewdness dressed up as an old woman's idle chat. You did something for me that she couldn't have done for herself in that room. You made a room see me. She's been trying to figure out how to say thank you for 3 days, and instead she bought you an apartment. That's a strange way to say thank you. She's a strange woman, Odessa agreed, fond and rueful. Give her time. She'll find the words eventually. She's never had much practice using them on someone she actually wanted to keep. I didn't know what to do with that sentence, so I filed it away next to the memory of that cold, clean scent hitting me across a crowded tea house, and I went back to work, and by the second week I had gone through 6 years of the Ransom Family Trust's accounts and found 4 places where the numbers didn't sit right. Small things, a transfer here, a rounding error there. Nothing that screamed fraud yet, but enough that the accountant in me kept circling back to the same page like a tongue to a sore tooth. I didn't say anything about it yet. I didn't have proof yet. I only had the same itch I'd had in the tea house, the sense of arithmetic lying to a room full of people too polite to check its work. Freya found me at 11 at night on a Thursday, 3 weeks into the job, still at the desk in the little office off the library, with columns of numbers spread out around me like a seance. You should be asleep, she said, in the doorway, arms crossed, that scent of hers rolling ahead of her into the room and settling something low and warm behind my sternum that I still hadn't found a polite name for. So should you, I said. It's 11 o'clock and you're wearing yesterday's tie. Something that wasn't quite a smile moved at the corner of her mouth. Fair point. She came and stood at my shoulder, close enough that I had to work not to lean toward her, and looked down at the pages. What are you looking at? 4 irregularities in the trust's ledgers over the last 6 years. Small ones. Probably nothing. I hesitated. Probably. Show me, she said, and pulled up a chair, and for the next hour the alpha queen of Ransom Holdings sat beside a waitress with an unfinished accounting certificate and let her walk through 6 years of numbers, line by line, asking sharp, exact questions, never once making me feel like I was wasting her time. It was the first time in my adult life a powerful person had looked at my work like it mattered instead of like it was cute that I'd tried. You're good at this, she said finally, sitting back, studying me instead of the ledger now. I used to be told I was wasting a good mind, I said before I could stop myself, by my father. When I presented Omega instead of Alpha, he said the family didn't need another set of hands good with numbers if those hands were just going to end up folding someone else's laundry. Something shifted in Freya's face, not pity, which I would have hated, but a kind of quiet, focused anger that made the room feel 2 degrees colder. Your father is a fool. I know, I said. It still took me 11 years to believe it. Believe it faster now, she said, and reached over, and for one long moment covered my hand where it rested on the ledger with her own, warm despite the coldness of her scent, careful in a way that felt deliberate, like she was giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. I see you, Wren Calloway. Not the waitress, not the Omega who was told she wasn't worth keeping. You, her thumb moved once, slow, across my knuckles. I'd like that to keep being true, if you'll let it. I'll let it, I said, and meant it more than I'd meant almost anything. She didn't kiss me that night. She told me later that she'd wanted to, and hadn't trusted herself to stop at wanting, and I understood, once I knew her better, that restraint was the most honest thing she had to offer. That a woman raised to believe softness got you killed had spent her whole life learning to want things without reaching for them, and the fact that she reached for my hand at all was its own kind of confession. The Trust's gala was 6 weeks after I started, and I went as Freya's guest, in a dress that cost more than every dress I'd ever owned combined, and Priscilla Vane found me by the dessert table within the first 20 minutes, with a smile sharpened to a point. "The waitress," she said, tasting the word like it was funny. I heard Freya took in a stray. How charming. Does she know you're the one who humiliated me in front of my friends? I did the arithmetic in front of your friends, I said. You did the humiliating all by yourself. Her smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes went very still and very cold. Careful, little birds who peck at things that aren't theirs tend to get their wings clipped. She leaned in, close enough that I caught a whiff of her perfume trying and failing to cover something sour underneath it, something that smelled almost like fear. You have no idea what you've walked into. Tell me then, I said, and watched her decide, very deliberately, not to. I found Freya 20 minutes later on the terrace, watching the city with her jaw set the way it got when she was holding something back, and when I told her what Priscilla had said, her expression didn't change at all, which was somehow more frightening than if it had. She's been circling my mother's seat on the trust board for a year, Freya said. I've never been able to prove why. Every time I get close to an answer, the ledgers get reorganized and the trail goes cold. She looked at me, and something in her face was asking a question she wasn't willing to say out loud yet. Those 4 irregularities you found. Keep looking. Quietly, I think you already know what you're going to find. I did. I just didn't yet know how bad it would be, or how close Priscilla Vane would come to burning both of us down before I found it. The gala went sideways at 11:52 p.m., which I know because I looked at my watch the second the lights went out. All of them, all at once, 60 floors of the Ransom Towers ballroom plunged into total darkness, and in the 3 seconds before the emergency generators kicked in, I heard Odessa Ransom cry out somewhere near the terrace doors, and Freya's hand find my wrist in the black and grip it hard enough to bruise, and Priscilla Vane's voice, cool and satisfied, cut through the panic, how careless of the building's security. I do hope nothing valuable gets misplaced in all this confusion. When the lights came back, Odessa was gone. Freya went white in a way I had never seen on her, a stillness that was worse than shouting, and within 4 minutes her head of security, a broad, gray-eyed woman named Marisol Cade, who had regarded me with open suspicion since the day I moved in, had the building's exits sealed and half the guest list being questioned in the coat check. I stood in the middle of it, doing the only thing I knew how to do under pressure, which was think in numbers, who had left the ballroom in the dark, who had come back changed, whose alibi didn't add up to the 4 minutes the lights were out. The Winslow woman, I said, finding Marisol by the elevator bank. The one in green, second cousin to a trust board member. She came back from the terrace with a torn hem and mud on her heels, and it hasn't rained in 11 days. There's a service stair behind the terrace that goes straight to the parking garage. Marisol looked at me for a long moment, reassessing something. How do you know the weather? I check it every morning before my shift. Old habit. I didn't have time to explain further because Freya was already moving, and I was moving with her, down the service stairs 2 at a time in a dress not built for running, toward the parking garage where a car was idling with its lights off and Odessa Ransom was being half-carried toward it by 2 men in valet uniforms who had never once, in 6 weeks, actually parked a car. Freya hit the first one before I even registered she'd moved, a single controlled blow that put him on the concrete, and I threw myself at the second man's arm as he reached for Odessa's shoulder, close enough that his elbow caught me across the cheekbone and sent me stumbling into a parked car hard enough to see stars. Freya was on him half a second later. And it wasn't graceful. It was brutal and fast and utterly without hesitation. And when it was over, both men were on the ground, and Odessa was sobbing into her daughter's shoulder, and Freya was looking at the blooming bruise on my face like it had been carved into her own skin instead. "You're hurt," she said, low, furious, her hands framing my jaw with a gentleness that didn't match the violence still radiating off her. "I'm fine," I said. "Your mother isn't. You could have stayed back. So could you," I said. "And you didn't, so don't lecture me." Something cracked open in her face then, not anger, something raw. "If anything had happened to you, it didn't," I said. "I'm here." "She's here. We're all here." I put my hand over hers where it still cradled my jaw. "You don't have to be the only one who's allowed to run toward danger, Freya." She kissed me then. Finally, in a parking garage with 2 unconscious men on the concrete and her mother crying 3 feet away. And it wasn't gentle. It was the kiss of someone who'd spent 7 weeks refusing to let herself want something and had just watched that something nearly get taken from her. When she pulled back, she pressed her forehead to mine, breathing hard. "Tell me to stop, and I will," she said. "Anything past this. Tell me, and I stop." "Don't stop," I said, and meant it with everything I had. The 2 men in valet uniforms turned out to work for a private security contractor with exactly one other client on record, Priscilla Vane. Marisol Cade had it confirmed by morning, and by that afternoon she was standing in my doorway with a cardboard box of my aunt's old accounting textbooks that she'd apparently tracked down and bought secondhand, saying, gruffly, that she'd never seen Freya move that fast for anyone, not once in 9 years, and that she supposed that meant something. It was the closest thing to a blessing I'd gotten from anyone in a long time, and I didn't tell her that it made my throat go tight. The weeks after the gala were the gentlest of my life. Freya came to find me most nights instead of waiting to be found, which I understood now was its own small revolution for her. She learned, without my telling her, that I still made my aunt's chamomile fig blend when I couldn't sleep, and one Tuesday I came home to find a tin of it on my counter with a card from a tea house 3 states over. The only place that still stocked the exact leaf my aunt used to order. She never explained how she'd found it. She never had to. "I used to think wanting things made you weak," she told me one night, both of us tangled in the low gold lamplight of her apartment, her fingers tracing slow, idle patterns against my shoulder. "My father used to say every want was a door someone else could walk through and hurt you. I spent 7 years locking all the doors." "And now?" "Now I think he was describing fear and calling it strength," she said. "And I think you're the first door I've ever wanted to leave open." She was quiet a moment, her scent warming around us. That cold, clean edge softened into something almost sweet. "I see you, Wren. I meant that the first night, and I mean it more now. Whatever happens with Priscilla, whatever this costs, I'm not closing this door again." I believed her. I believed her right up until the morning, 3 weeks later, when Priscilla Vane's counterattack landed and very nearly proved me wrong. It started with a headline, from Waitress to Ward, inside the Alpha Queen's desperate new obsession, and it got worse from there. Somebody, and I didn't need Marisol's forensics team to tell me who, had leaked a doctored version of the trust's ledgers to 3 major outlets, with my name circled in red ink and a headline suggesting the 4 irregularities I'd flagged weren't evidence of fraud at all, but evidence that I had personally been skimming from the trust since my first week, using my access to Freya's private accounts to line my own. There were fabricated wire transfers. There was a photograph of me at the gala, cropped to make it look like I'd been caught reaching into Odessa's handbag instead of steadying her when the lights went out. By 9 that morning, the board had called an emergency session. By 11, 2 of the trust's oldest donors had frozen their contributions pending investigation. By noon, Elias Ordway, my old manager, apparently eager to matter to someone important for the first time in his career, had given an on-camera interview describing me as a girl who'd always seemed a little too sharp, a little too watchful, the kind of person you learn not to trust around a cash drawer. I sat in Freya's office and watched her read the coverage in total silence, her jaw a hard line, and when she finally looked up at me, there was something in her face I had never once seen there before, and it took me a horrible, hollow second to recognize it as doubt. "Freya," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. "You don't believe this." "No," she said, too fast, and then worse, slower. "No, I don't think I do." She dragged a hand down her face. "But the board is going to vote on my mother's seat by Friday, and every donor we have is asking why the accountant who found the irregularities is the one now covered in them, and I don't, Ren. I don't know how to fight a fire that's burning both of us from the same match. So you fight it with the truth," I said. "I didn't do this. You know I didn't do this." "I know," she said, and reached for me, and I let her. Because whatever doubt had cracked through her that morning, her hands on me were still steady, still certain, still the hands of a woman who'd said she wasn't closing that door again. "I know. I'm going to fix this. I promise you that. You can't fix this by yourself," I said. "I found 4 irregularities before this happened. I need 3 more days with the real ledgers, the ones Priscilla can't doctor, because she doesn't know I already copied them, and I can prove exactly where the money went and exactly whose signature is on the transfer authorizations. But I need you to trust me while I do it, because it's about to look a lot worse before it looks better." She looked at me for a long moment, and something settled behind her eyes. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand in it with me instead of away from it. "Then do it," she said. "Whatever you need. I'm not letting Priscilla Vane decide what's true about you. 3 days is not very long to build a case against a woman who has spent a year covering her tracks, and I spent every hour of it in the little office off the library with the door locked and my aunt's old ledgers stacked beside me like a promise I was finally about to keep, tracing 4 small irregularities backward through 6 years of transfers until they stopped being small and started being a shape with a name on it. Over and over, buried under authorized signatures that had been forged with a precision that told me whoever did it had practiced. I found it at 2:47 in the morning on the 3rd night, a shell account registered to a company called Vane Meridian Holdings, receiving quarterly transfers from the trust disguised as maintenance fees on a property that, according to the county records I pulled at 3 a.m., with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, did not exist. 6 years, just over $4 million. And one more thing. Buried in an email thread Priscilla's own compromised auditor had been careless enough to keep unencrypted, the forged wire authorization that had framed me, time-stamped and traced to an IP address inside Priscilla Vane's own home office. I called Freya at 3:12 a.m. She picked up on the first ring, like she hadn't been sleeping either. "I have her," I said. "I have all of it." There was a silence on the line that felt like the whole city holding its breath. "Then we're done being quiet about it," Freya said. "Friday's board vote. We do this in front of everyone." The trust's emergency board meeting was moved, at Freya's insistence, to a public session. Every donor, every reporter who'd printed Priscilla's leaked story, every member of the board who'd spent a week whispering about the waitress with sticky fingers, all seated in the same gilded room where I had once poured a stranger a cup of chamomile tea because nobody else would. Priscilla Vane arrived in a dove-gray suit and a smile built for cameras, and she got exactly 4 minutes of it before I stood up with a folder in my hands and asked the room a single question. "Does anyone here know what Vane Meridian Holdings maintains?" The smile held for 1 more second before it started to die. "I don't know what you're implying," Priscilla said, But I won't stand here and be accused by a woman already under investigation for embezzlement herself. I'm not under investigation, I said. I was framed 3 days ago using a forged wire authorization traced to an IP address registered to your home office. I have the header. I have the timestamp. I have 6 years of maintenance fee transfers paid by this trust to a property in Vane Meridian's portfolio that, according to the county assessor, was demolished 9 years ago and has been an empty lot ever since. I set the folder on the table, opened to the page, and let the silence do the rest of the work for me. $4,112,000 over 24 quarters to maintain a building that doesn't exist. You accused Odessa Ransom of being unfit to sit on this board 3 months ago. I'd like the board to ask itself who's actually been unfit to sit on it. Priscilla's mask didn't crack all at once. It went slowly, degree by degree, the sweetness curdling into something desperate. You have no idea what it cost me, she said low, to the room. To Odessa specifically, her composure finally splitting open. Watching your husband choose you for this seat over me, every year, for 30 years, while I did the actual work and you got the credit for being kind. I built half of what this trust is, and nobody ever once thanked me for it, so I decided I'd take what I was owed instead of waiting for gratitude that was never coming. Her eyes found mine, glittering with something close to hatred. And then you, a waitress, walked into a room I'd spent a year arranging and undid it with a napkin and some arithmetic. Yes, I said, I did. Marisol Cade was already crossing the room with 2 of the trust's retained security, and the board's chair was already calling for a formal vote on Priscilla's removal, and somewhere in the noise of it, Odessa Ransomi reached over and took my hand and held it, hard, and didn't let go. Priscilla Vane was escorted out of the building in handcuffs 40 minutes later, her accomplice auditor arrested by that evening with a signed confession by morning, and Elias Ordway, when a reporter finally caught up with him for a follow-up quote, found himself unable to explain why he'd been so quick to believe the worst of a woman he'd worked beside for 3 years. And lost, within the month, both his position at the Copper Kettle and whatever credibility his hasty interview had briefly bought him. Freya found me on the terrace afterward, the same terrace where Priscilla had first threatened me, and she didn't say anything at all for a long moment, just stood beside me looking out at a city that had spent one very long day nearly believing a lie about me and then watching it burn to nothing. I should have trusted you completely, she said finally, not eventually. Immediately, I let one bad morning put a crack in something that should never have had room for doubt in it. You trusted me enough to give me 3 days, I said. That's not nothing. It should have been more, she said, and turned to face me fully, and something in her posture had changed, gone still in the particular way I'd learned meant she was about to say something she'd been holding onto with both hands. I've spent my whole life being told that love is a weakness a person like me can't afford. I believed it long enough to build an empire out of never needing anyone. And then a woman in an apron did arithmetic in front of a room that was laughing at my mother, and I have not had one uncomplicated day since, and I would not trade a single one of them. She reached into her coat and produced a small box, plain, unhurried, and went down on one knee on the terrace stone, without a trace of the careful control she wore into every boardroom in the city. I don't have a clever speech. I have $4 million of fraud I helped you prove, and a mother who adores you more than she's ever adored me, and I have this. I see you, Wren Calloway. I saw you the first morning, and every morning since, and I would like very much to spend every morning left seeing you for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? I said yes before she'd finished opening the box, which made her laugh, a real laugh, startled out of her, the same way her mother's had been startled out of her in that tea house months before. And the sound of it, warm and unguarded in a woman the whole city called cold, undid something in my chest that had been braced tight since I was 17 years old and told I wasn't worth keeping. We were married on a bright morning in early spring in the garden behind the Ronsom estate, with Odessa in the front row, wearing a new coat and an unchipped robin's egg blue teacup, mended now, the crack traced in careful gold, a gift from Freya, who had tracked down the original piece from the tea house's broken set and had it repaired rather than replaced. Set on the table beside her like a small, deliberate monument to the day we'd met. Marisol stood as Freya's witness and told anyone who'd listen, with gruff and genuine pride, that in 9 years working for the Ransom family she had never once seen her employer wait outside a door for someone, not until me, and that she supposed that meant I'd done something none of the rest of us had managed. "Tell me to stop, and I will," Freya murmured against my ear during our first dance, an old private joke by then, worn soft with use. "Don't stop," I said, and she didn't. Not once. Not for the rest of that day, or any of the ones that came easily after it. 6 months later, I sat for my accounting licensing exam with Freya's name on the emergency contact card and passed it clean, and took a formal seat as the trust's chief forensic accountant, the job my aunt had always wanted for me and I'd once believed I would never get to have. A year on, we still keep the mended teacup on the kitchen table. And some mornings, I catch the light hitting the gold seam in the crack and think about every version of myself who believed a chip meant something was ruined instead of just marked by what it had survived. Some cups get thrown away for the crack in them. The lucky ones get someone who decides the crack is worth mending instead, gold and visible and proud, and pours the good tea into them anyway. I spent most of my life believing I was the kind of thing people set aside. It took one woman, refusing to look away, to teach me I had never been anything but worth keeping. The end. That mended teacup still sits on our table because some things deserve to be repaired in gold instead of thrown away, and that's really the whole heart of this one. Being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy. It just means the right person hasn't looked yet. If Ren and Freya's story found something in you, subscribe to the channel so the next story finds you too. I'd love to know in the comments, what's the one thing about Ren you think finally made Freya fall for her? The courage in that tea house or the honesty afterward? Tell me below. Until next time, may you always find someone who pours you the good cup first.